In this clip, we'll learn how to visualize and modify vertex normals in Maya. All right, great. So this is going to be your dwarf_start.ma file. You'll find this inside that same geometry folder we looked at a moment ago. Okay, great. So again, when we were in Substance Painter, we created our project and I showed you some areas that were really sort of setting off an alarm in my head. You can see here that the beard appears to be all faceted, as well as this little crest. And we have edges that should be hard, like this edge that runs along the inner top portion of this pauldron, but are not hard. They're soft. So we've got some problems with the vertex normals for this asset. Let me just jump back to Maya and show you how we can begin to visualize those. So I'm going to select the beard and let's shift select the body mesh, just like so. By the way, this file is exactly where we left off inside the UV and game characters course here inside of Maya, using this exact same asset. I'm going to come up here to display polygons, and I'm going to choose vertex normals. Now he apparently grows a little bit of green fuzz, but if we leave those two meshes selected, we can zoom in here and you can see here for the beard, if we zoom in far enough, there is indeed 4 little green lines growing out of each vertex. Well, we learned in the previous clip that 4 lines like this indicates hardened vertex normals. Again, those lines are perpendicular to each face that they belong to. If we want this mesh to appear shaded in a soft fashion to where it's not faceted, then we need to soften or average these vertex normals out so that it renders that way. Let me show you how this is done. I'm going to come in here and just turn off the vertex normal display by going to display polygons and vertex normals. And we'll come over here and just select the beard. Now under the mesh display menu, you're going to find lots of different things here. Reverse is going to do something like reversing the face normals, which we're not really concerned with face normals. My modeler has done a really good job of making sure that they're all oriented in the same direction. It's the vertex normals that are of a concern right now. So there's a couple of different ways we could do this. We could try and use the average function right here, but to be honest with you, I've not ever really used this. I've always just simply used these two options right down here. Either we're going to soften all of the edges that have been selected, or we're going to harden all of the edges that have been selected. We're explicitly doing this. So again, remember, we want to start from a completely softened or completely hardened state, depending on the asset we're working on. If it's some kind of a mechanical or non-organic asset, potentially hardening all the edges would be the right choice. But being that this is an organic object, it's a character, lots of smooth edges, lots of soft curves. Yeah, you've heard people say before, there's no hard lines or hard edges in life. So we want to soften this up. So let's just choose soften edge. And there we go. You can see all the faceting went away. There is some faceting in his arm right here as well. So there's some real inconsistencies with the vertex normals. So I'm going to come in here and just go in and we'll go ahead and soften those as well. Now again, I've merged all of these meshes together. So in doing so, I'm actually selecting everything that was on these display layers. We'll do the same thing here. Soften edge. Okay, fantastic. Again, so everything has been softened. Now there's some things here, as I pointed out a moment ago, that we know don't need to be softened. In fact, we want them to be explicitly hard. For example, this edge right here, it runs kind of right in this area here. You can't see where that edge should be right now because the shading here is shading this as if this is completely rounded. When in reality, there is a series of edges here that make a loop. So what we need to do is we need to decide where we want to place explicitly hard edges. Now this is something that you'll want to consult your high resolution mesh. Now this file has this high resolution mesh in it right now, but I probably won't leave it there because there are FBX files inside that same geometry folder that you could just import into Maya and examine if you want to. This high resolution mesh here is pretty large, and I don't want to make the download for these exercise files any larger than it has to be. But in looking at this, you can see, well, this is where the subjectivity comes into play, right? How rigid do we want to be? What kind of an edge do we want to say, okay, that needs to be hardened? And what kind of edge are we okay with leaving as soft? So for example, on this little disc right here on the front of his pauldron, you might think, well, that might be hard. But in reality, if we look at that, there's actually a beveled edge on that high resolution. It's probably easier to see if I deselect it. Now in the low res, if we came in and looked at that, you can actually see there's actually a bevel that's built into the low res as well. So that's a situation where I probably would not harden that edge. Now the edges here, the really dominant strong edges for the frame on this shoulder piece, yeah, I want to harden those. Also, there are some cylinders right down here that we may need to harden as well. There's also a belt buckle here that I happen to know is represented by only a few polygons on the GameRes mesh, so we may want to harden those edges up as well. So let's get to it. We'll just come over here and bring our GameRes back. And let's come in and make some edge selections. I'll right click and go to Edge. I'm simply going to double click on some of these loops to select the entire loop. So we'll select that loop. I'll shift select this inner loop. May have to make some additional selections if there are some triangles. And you can see I've got all of those edges selected there. We'll come over here and there's our problem loop right there. And we'll select that loop as well. So we have selected all of the loops for this shoulder piece right here. Now we might go crazy and do some of this stuff on the inside, but I think this should be good for right now. Let's come in here and go to Mesh Display, Harden Edge. And again, what we have done is hardened the edges that we had selected. So if we go to Object Mode, deselect here, you can see now those edges are shading as if they are hardened. That's perfect. I really like that. So this stuff on the inside, the detail work here, this might take some testing. So if you want to maybe put off hardening those edges, you can always come back in and harden them at a later point. Now let's come in here and do these little cylinders we spoke about. Again, you can see kind of this weird shading along the top of the cylinders. That's part of the reason we're doing this. So we'll come in here and select that loop around the cap for each one. Mesh Display, Harden Edge. Perfect. Come over here and we'll do the belt buckle next. I know he's got a second glove, but that's the exact same thing. You can do that in between clips if you want. We'll just come in and I'm double clicking on the exact same loop on the front and the back because they were right there. Double click on that loop of edges. Now I can't, oh, I see it peeking through right down here somewhere. Maybe? Oh, I did. I guess I don't. Oh, there it is. We'll double click that. Okay, great. Now there are some other edges here that we want to go ahead and harden. So let's come in here and select these guys. Just like so. Fantastic. So really the only edges on this thing that we don't want to harden are these little edges in the corners on the front and the back face. So we can come in here and harden away just like so. And back to Mesh Display, Harden Edges. Awesome. So we've got all of the edges targeted and explicitly hardened for the GameRes mesh. I'll do the other glove in between this clip and the next clip. But in the next clip, let's go ahead and move forward and let's talk about some potential changes to the UVs that we may need to make based on these explicit vertex assignments.